The tow truck was already halfway into my driveway when I stumbled out in nothing but boxers and a t-shirt that read, "I void warranties," holding a steaming mug of coffee. The driver was reaching for the hook when I shouted, "Hey, that's my truck! What the hell do you think you're doing?" And standing beside him, arms folded, was a woman with frosted blonde curls, sunglasses the size of dinner plates, and a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. She looked me up and down like she owned me and said, "I'm Wilma McCartwright, president of the Meadowbrook HOA." That monstrosity of a truck is in violation. It's unsightly. It's being removed. My truck, my driveway, my home. I told her as much, walking closer, still barefoot on the concrete. It's a personal vehicle. It's clean legal, and I've lived here for 6 years without a single problem. She didn't even flinch. The HOA passed an amendment last month. No commercial vehicles. That includes anything with racks or toolboxes. She said it like she was laying down federal law. I pointed at my F-250. "I'm a carpenter. That rack holds my tools. This isn't a junkyard, it's my livelihood." The tow driver looked uneasy. "Sir, the HOA cleared this. They signed the paperwork." I snapped back. "Unless you've got a court order or a cop behind you, touch my truck and I'll charge you with trespassing." That did it. The driver backed off. Wilma, though, huffed and scribbled on her clipboard. "Threatening contractors is another violation. You'll be fined for hostile behavior." I pointed right at the property line. "You're on my land, Wilma. Clipboard or not, you're not above the law." She pulled out her phone. "Expect a fine for obstruction. You'll be hearing from the board." I walked inside, shut the door, and let her voice trail off. And that's when I smiled to myself, because Wilma didn't know what I knew. She didn't know I'd spent weeks digging through county records last year when the HOA tried to bully me into repainting my house beige. She didn't know I'd found something buried in the archives that changed everything. I didn't just own my house, I owned the street. Still that afternoon, when I got home from the records office, papers tucked under my arm, notarized and stamped, the bright yellow violation notice taped to my door still stung. $250 for non-compliant vehicle storage. Another $100 for verbal aggression. I laughed, but not the happy kind. The kind you let out when you're so angry you can't decide if you should scream or just rip the damn paper to shreds. For a moment, I almost gave in. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the notice, thinking maybe it'd be easier to just pay the fine. Swallow my pride, avoid the headache. I asked myself, what if I'm wrong? What if everyone thinks I'm the crazy neighbor who can't follow rules? That fear sat heavy. But then I remembered the day they tried to force me to paint over the color I'd chosen for my own home. Beige. Always beige. That was the moment I'd sworn I wouldn't let them dictate my life. Not then, not now. So I grabbed the folder from the county clerk's office and marched straight into the monthly HOA board meeting the next day. The clubhouse smelled like stale carpet and store-brand cookies. Wilma sat at the center of the folding table like a queen presiding over peasants, flanked by Gary the guy who wore a Bluetooth headset 24/7 and Lorna the Halloween decoration police. When Wilma saw me carrying a cardboard tube and a manila folder, her smile tightened. "We'll begin public comment shortly," she said flatly. I didn't sit down. "I'm not here for comment. I'm here for correction." Gasps rippled through the room as I unrolled the original subdivision plat across the table, pinning down the corners with certified copies of my deed and county zoning reports. "You fined me for violating a rule you have no authority to enforce," I said. "This street, Wisteria Hollow, was never deeded to the city, never annexed into the HOA. It's privately owned. By me." Gary leaned in, squinting. "That can't be right. We maintain those roads." I cut him off. "You mow the grass. That's not ownership. The pavement the storm drains the mailbox, easement, they're mine." Lorna flipped through the papers with wide eyes. "This has to be a mistake." "It isn't," I shot back. "Ask Ron down at the records office. He'll confirm it. Twice." Wilma's voice turned icy. "Even if that were true, you're still part of the HOA. Your property was annexed." I tapped the back page of my deed. Except it wasn't. No signature. No vote. No agreement. which means your rules don't apply to me. Never have." The room went silent. I slid a cease and desist letter across the table. "Any further attempts to enforce your rules, issue fraudulent fines, or trespass on my property will be met with legal action." Wilma bristled. "You can't just exempt yourself." I smirked. "I didn't exempt myself. The law did. And since I own the street, your security patrols, the ones cruising by twice a day, they're trespassing unless I give written permission." That night, Wilma must have been seething because the very next morning I had a visitor, a county deputy. He politely asked to see my documents. I showed him everything. He nodded slowly. "We've been getting complaints about HOAs overstepping, but this is different. They tried to tow your truck off land they don't even control. That's fraud." He promised to pass it to the prosecutor. A weight lifted from my chest. It wasn't just me against them anymore. It was me and the law. Later that day, a neighbor named Tom stopped by. Rough hands, sun-creased face, the kind of man you know works with the earth. He said, "Heard what happened at the meeting. They fined me once for planting tomatoes too close to the sidewalk. I paid it just to avoid the fight. But you stood up." I shrugged. More like paperwork than courage. He looked at me hard. What if we all stood up? Over the next week, people started knocking on my door. Wind chime fines, porch light violations, trash bin complaints. Dozens of neighbors, each with their own story of being nickel and dimed into silence. I started a folder, then a spreadsheet. And soon, a pattern emerged. Rules that never existed. Amendments that were never voted on. Fines issued without a shred of legality. And the money, where was it going? I dug deeper into the HOA's financials documents I'd requested months before under state transparency law. That's when it got ugly. $32,000 in legal consultations. No lawsuits on record. Payments to companies that didn't even exist anymore. One of them registered under Lorna's niece's name. Another, a shell company tied to a P.O. box 2 towns over. It wasn't mismanagement. It was a racket. When I turned it over to the sheriff's detective, he didn't even bother hiding his disgust. "This is felony-level embezzlement. If fines were used to generate these funds, that's coercion. That's criminal." 2 days later, I watched from my porch as plainclothes officers knocked on Wilma's door. She tried to block the entrance robe cinched tight, but when they showed her the warrant, she had no choice. By week's end, Gary and Lorna were also questioned. The HOA's bank account was frozen. Panic spread like wildfire. But the best part. The residents weren't afraid anymore. We gathered in the park not under HOA direction, but as neighbors. I stood in front of over 100 people and said, "They've been stealing from us, intimidating us with fake rules and fake fines. But they only got away with it because we believed we had no power. We do, and we're taking it back." The State Oversight Division suspended the board. The prosecutor filed charges conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying documents, financial elder abuse. My quiet title action went through Wisteria Hollow legally and permanently out of HOA jurisdiction. No future board could ever touch it again. And that's where the story ends. With Wilma and her cronies stripped of power facing trial for crimes they thought they'd never pay for. With neighbors finally free from the clipboard tyranny of people who mistook control for community. I just wanted to keep my truck from being towed. Instead, I exposed a fraud, broke the HOA's grip, and took back the street. Lesson learned. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't just save your driveway, it saves your whole neighborhood.